Mira, share screen.
Should we need to let everyone in first? No?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
Namaste Badane and Jai Jayendra. We are going to be speaking with Dr. Mehool Sanghrajka. Is an EdTech entrepreneur and managing trustee of the Institute of Jainology. He teaches the Jain faith in a practical style with everyday examples, making it easy to understand. He's married to Ashna with 3 grown-up children. He's going to talk about you are what you think. We consider thoughts we have to be ours and often indulge in them, sometimes merely for fun. However, did you know that our thoughts shape our future and our destiny? Let's find out how. Mehul bhai, please take over.
Jai Jinendra. Namaste, everybody. First of all, my thanks to Sandip Bhai and Oshwal UK for inviting me to this event, and to all of you for coming this evening. I would say that if during the talk you have questions or things that you don't understand, please put your hand up and we'll try and answer them then. Otherwise, I'll leave about 20 to 30 minutes at the end for any other questions. So the topic today is you are what you think. And by that, I mean that your thoughts are actually not just thoughts that you have that sometimes you dismiss, but your thoughts actually determine your future and your future lives and the events that happen in those lives. So let's start a little bit before that and think about what we mean by the word belief. So we're talking about this in the Jain context. And as Jains, we have belief in Jainism. And when you think about belief in any faith, it's something about somebody can't hear.
No, we can hear you.
Okay.
Fine.
So, so belief is about something that is supernatural. And by supernatural, I mean it's not something that is easily tangible. So for example, if you believe in Hinduism, you might believe in Krishna or Ram or Shankar Bhagwan. But these are things that you have to believe in. They're not things you can see, feel, touch. And similarly in Christianity, in Islam, and in all of these religions. And so this idea of something that is supernatural, something that is beyond us, beyond our senses, beyond our minds, is very common. And in the Jain religion, we have a similar belief. We don't have a God that is a creator, but we have a similar belief. And we believe in this idea of dualism. So by dualism, we mean that we are actually 2 separate things put together. We are this physical, tangible body that you see, but we know that will pass away. And we believe that we are the soul in the body, which is permanent and eternal. And that soul has 2 other factors. That one is that its destiny is determined by its karma. And it is the karma in your soul that gives you this body. And the reason it gives you this body is because karma is a physical particle. And it needs a physical body for you to experience that karma. So you have a body, and that body can be heavenly, it could be on earth, it could be plants or animals, or it could be in hell. The other thing you have is this idea of reincarnation, that this isn't the only life. And that means that after this life, there will be another and another and another, until you get to the point where your karma disappears or you've removed it completely, and then you become liberated, and we call that moksha. So that set of rules is our belief system. And that is what defines us as Jains. And we call those beliefs tattva. Tattva means that which is absolute. And by absolute, we mean that it's not subject to anything. It does, those things exist, whether you're a human being or a plant or an animal. They exist on every planet, every continent. They're not subject to anything. So these tattvas are essentially the core of the Jain faith. So what I'm going to do is focus on a couple of them initially today. And the first one of that is this idea of a soul. And this soul is essentially the energy, the consciousness that's within you. So if you see somebody who has passed away, they look very different because that consciousness has left them. And this idea of a soul is something that is eternal, which means it carries on from this life to next. And this belief in the reincarnation means that what we do in this life will carry over to the next. In other religions, they have this idea of a God, which means that you go up to God or you go to hell, and God then decides what happens to you. In the Jain faith, we don't have a God, and therefore we believe in the idea of karma. And then the other element is this physical body. Now, this physical body has been decided already in terms of the body and your family and the structure and what you do by your karma. So your karma is already playing a strong part in who you are and what you are. And this body is made out of physical matter. It has the same atoms and particles as everything else you see. And after you pass away, it will go back into the ground and become, the part of the earth. So it's physical, but it's temporary. And it doesn't have the ability to see beyond its senses. So it relies heavily on its senses, sight, sound, taste, touch, smell, as well as this mind, this thing called the mind. And this thing called the mind is something that is within you, but it is not something that is yours in the sense that it also will go with this body. And so what is this mind we have? Every living being has some sort of mind, even the smallest plants, because they have a sense. So if the sense is touch, which is what plants have, then to feel that touch, they have a mind. So the mind is essentially the way that you understand your senses. And if you are a 5-sense being, for example, a cow, then you are at the top of that animal food chain in terms of having 5 senses and a mind. And then if you go beyond that, you get to humans. So how are we as humans different to every other living being? And the reason you and I are all different is because our mind has this idea of discrimination. We can decide between something being right and wrong, something being good and bad. And the other big factor that we have compared to animals is that our life is not programmed. If you think about animals, what does their life look like? It looks like they are essentially living a life looking for food, in fear of being attacked by other animals, and therefore living in that fear and anxiety. They believe in this idea of reproduction, and they are essentially living in that circle for the entire period that they're alive, and that becomes their life, essentially. With us, we don't have that programmed life. We actually have choices. We have the ability to decide how we spend our time, what we do, and so on. And so our life actually is far more meaningful, which is why human life is considered the greatest of all types of life. And this mind essentially sometimes is confused with the brain, but it's not the brain because it actually is across the whole of your the whole of your body. It's not a sense organ in the sense of being sight or taste or touch. Sometimes people call it the sixth sense. And it has the ability to know, but it is not all knowing. You have to give it that, it has to develop that, so it has the ability, but is not necessarily born with that ability. So when you think about that mind, we use this word mindful and mindfulness quite a lot. But what is that mindfulness that we talk about? Well, if you look at the opposite of mindfulness, it's carelessness. You're either mindful or you're careless. So mindfulness is about caring and being careful and having a focus. And when you think about this idea of this mind, it's interesting, isn't it, that when we think of Bhagwan Mahavir and his life, from the time he took Diksha at the age of 30 until he got his Keval Gnan at the age of 42, he was largely in meditation and essentially looking at focusing and controlling this mind that he had. And so the idea of mind is something that is incredibly powerful, something that, you know, allows us to do things that most animals and most others cannot. And the human mind is also very different from others in that we are able to gain experience, not through having direct experience, but by reading or hearing about others. So when we see a film, when we hear other stories, when we read a book, we actually pick up those experiences in our minds out of things that others have experienced and told us. So our mind is far more than what we've lived through ourselves, but it also is composed of what others have done and what others have said to us or what we've seen. And therefore, it is very rich and very creative. Part of this idea of delusion that we talk about in general is the fact that both our bodies and our minds are temporary, and we spend the time that they are here imagining that they are us. And by us, I mean the soul that we have, which is eternal. So for this life, we will imagine, in my case, that I am Mehool, and I live as if this is the only me, and that when I die, I don't kind of think about whether there is a next life. So what I'm doing is everything for this body in this life. And that is the sort of delusion that we live in. And that is essentially the crux of the Jain religion. So when you think about this idea of mind, the next question that comes about is, when we think about these tattvas, the mind and the body and the soul are the first two. And so in understanding that there is a joining of what is in some ways physical and in some ways energy, is the creation that we have become. The creation of the physical body, which goes from birth to birth, and this soul, which also goes from birth to birth, but in other bodies. So you throw off one body, you pick up another. And to do that, the body has to keep you as in the person that you are, accumulating karma, because that karma is what will define your next life. So if it stops, if you stop accumulating that karma, what happens is that you then start to become less and less and less reliant on that karma, and over a period of time, once it disappears, you'll become liberated. So in this, what causes the inflow, that karma? When you think about inflow, there are two ways, two things that need to happen to karma for it to flow in. The first is that there has to be something that attracts the karma to you as the physical particle. And then the second is that something has to stick that karma to your soul. So the first part of that is this idea of action. We call it yog or yoga, but that yog is not the same as what you see with people doing positions and weight loss and all of that. Yog means activity, an activity of mind, of speech, and of body. And that activity is in many ways the only free will that we have, that we are able to do things with our mind, speech, and our body. Everything else we have around us, we do not have the same level of control or the ability to control that. So when we think about who we are, in essence, that is who we are. We are a composition of our thoughts, our deeds, and our words. The thing that people often forget is that these aren't in any priority or in any order. That the thoughts, the words, and the deeds are all the same. And because they're all the same, what it means is that you don't have to say anything. You just have to think it. You don't have to do anything. You just have to think it. And it's the same. And it has the same level of karma that it will attract. So in reality, because most of us don't say very much for fear, for lots of other reasons, and we don't do very much, but we think a lot. And in those thoughts, we are actually binding the karma that becomes part of us in this life and part of us in the next life. So when you think about that, how does that work? So the thoughts basically will do two things. They will decide on the type of karma that you bind. So karma that will block, for example, the knowledge that you have, or the passions that you have, or you're having a good body, or the pain and suffering you go through, or the family you have, and all of those is the type. And the second is the intensity of the karma that you're binding. Now that basically means that by thinking things, by imagining things, by interacting with the thoughts and, saying good things or bad things about others, gossiping, looking at what others are doing with envy or jealousy or hatred, we ourselves are binding that karma. And we're binding that karma both in terms of the intensity of that karma. Is it mild? Is it medium? Is it very intense? And what type of karma it is. So in that, just think about that for a second, that, how many thoughts do you have in a day? And how many of those thoughts are positive? Because all the negative ones are going to give you negative results. The other thing to think about with karma is the fact that karma doesn't have a name on it. So karma is not something that comes with another person's name. It is you and what you have thought. It doesn't say that that person actually is attached to this karma, which means when you get the results, it is not from that person. You can get that results from anybody. So if today you're sitting imagining that you're driving a car and you purposefully crash into another car, you bind that karma. Somebody else will come and do the same to you, but it won't necessarily be the person you're thinking about. So from that, you should gather that almost everything that happens to you is happening to you for that simple reason, that basically the karma that you're experiencing is nothing more than the karma that you have bound. And in that process, you're almost deciding your own destiny through your thoughts. You're creating an environment through how you interact with people, your environment, whatever. But that interaction doesn't have to be physical or in speech. And so your thoughts essentially become what you actually end up being. So let's look at that from another perspective. That if you then think about this whole scenario, what we have is essentially this body with a soul, and the idea of your mind, speech, and physical things that you do, getting that karma to come in. But the question that most people wonder about is, why is it that we have the thoughts that we do? Why is it that we sometimes think badly of people? Why is it that sometimes we have, anxiety, we have jealousy, we have rage, we have anger? What causes all of those? And that is the critical question in all of this. Because if we can stop that process, what will happen is that in essence, we will be in control of our minds. And if we become in control of our minds, we become in control of what happens to us, or our destiny. So in thinking about that, come back to what I said about this idea of the mind and the senses. The mind is also the way that you start to experience your karma. So say at some point in time, you've been angry with somebody, really angry. And the time has now come for that karma to give you its fruit. So how does it give you its fruit? What it does is that it rises from your soul, and in your mind, you start experiencing this feeling of anger. Sometimes you say to people, just stay away from me for a while. I'm feeling quite anxious and quite angry about something. You might not even know what it is. And then as that karma carries on rising, that anger carries on developing inside of you. So you're becoming an angry person, but you haven't become angry yet. All you're doing is you're basically becoming angry as a person. What then happens is that something triggers that anger. It might be that, if you have a son or daughter and they're young and they spill some water or milk or something, if you see somebody do something, you're driving and somebody cuts across you, and that becomes a trigger. And that trigger makes you angry. So you've gone from having anger to this idea of being angry. And that being angry is the thought process. Whilst you had anger, if you had taken a few deep breaths and said, this is anger, this is not me, or something of that sort, if you had waited until it disappeared, that process would have stopped. But now that you've engaged in this feeling of anger and become angry, that angry is the karma that you have rebound. So the karma is happy, if karma can be happy, the karma is happy that it's now got your anger back within you, and that means you will experience it again. And this happens with everything, that a lot of the time we're daydreaming, lost in thought. A lot of the time we have baggage about memories that we've had or experiences we've had. Sometimes we're anxious about what's going to happen in the future. And in all of those things, what we tend to do is engage with those feelings, believing that those feelings are us. And in engaging with those feelings, we then start to exhibit them. So if you're anxious about or about something that has happened, what do? You start talking to other people, you start exhibiting kind of fear. And by doing those things, you've now become a part of those thoughts and feelings, and they've rebound into your soul. So this is the cycle that keeps you in this cycle of birth and death and birth and death. The karma has a way to get back into you. And in all that process, there are two things that are very strong, aren't they? The first is this idea that this body is actually you. And secondly, when you have thoughts and feelings, that they're your thoughts and your feelings. And in all of this, what we forget is that all of this is essentially the karma that is inside of you, finding a way for you to experience it. Because you've bound it before, it needs to give you the experience that it has. And so this mechanism means that you're forever in this cycle. Now, the other thing that happens is that our experience is not just ours, but as I said earlier, that as people, we have this ability, great ability, of taking other people's experiences. How often do you see people saying, do you know what happened to so-and-so? He was doing this or she was doing this and this happened, and so on. If enough people tell you that, you know, every time they've walked in the street after dark, they've got mugged or robbed, that becomes your experience, okay? Or that becomes something that you start to believe is true because you've heard other people tell you it's true. So in that process, just imagine now what happens, that you get some sort of experience, you then mix that experience, you get some sort of feeling out of your karma, and say the feeling is fear. You then mix it with this experience of having heard from so many people that this is what will happen, this is what happened to them, and this is what will happen to anybody else. So you start believing that if I now go out and it's dark, I'm definitely going to get mugged. You might have memories of that happening to you at some point previously. And in all of that, what you have now developed is this notion, again, that you believe to be true, and then you start exhibiting it. So you may not go out. If you go out, you're walking quickly and you're scared. Or, you know, you tell other people, you know, I'm doing this, but, you know, be careful if you go out. I'm not sure this is what it is. And that becomes your experience that you're now exhibiting and living. And that becomes the karma that you are binding. Okay? So experience, baggage, anxiety, depression, all of that is the way that you see things. That is the color you put on everything that you see. Another example, so, you know, many of us came here from Kenya, and in Kenya at that time, most people used to have dogs as security rather than as pets. And so if you've only experienced dogs as being fierce, and then you come here, every dog you see, you'll be scared of, because your experience of this dog is that it is there to protect somebody and it'll attack you if you go anywhere near it. That, again, is the experience you add to any feeling or thought that you have. The other is this idea of attachment. And how does attachment happen? Attachment happens, again, because you have this notion of this body being attached to certain things. If there are two kids on a bicycle and one falls over, if it's somebody you don't know, you will look around and see if there's somebody who's going to help it and say, I hope he's not hurt, full stop, end of story. If that's your brother and you think he's been hurt badly, you will run across to see if he's okay. Now, those two kids might be identical in terms of age, size, and there are two souls, but one is attached to you. And that attachment, again, causes you to have feelings. So just think about it. In this scenario, somebody falls over, you might be a bit scared, you might have anxiety about whether they're hurt. And as a result, you start to exhibit, again, those feelings. And that, again, binds the karma associated with it. So we're in this scenario where we spend most of our time living between those two scenarios of having passions, anger or pride or deceit or greed or jealousy or ego, or reacting to things that we believe are attached to us. And in that, every feeling we get is now tainted with that. And because it's tainted with things that you're so familiar with, it basically comes across as your feelings. I'm not feeling I'm feeling angry, or I don't like the way he talked to me, and I'm angry, or I'm jealous because so-and-so has got something, or whatever it is. And that is the engagement, because you then exhibit it. That gives you the karma. If at the time you have those feelings, you let them go, you don't engage with them, you take a deep breath and you say, these are not my feelings. These are things that, my body is feeling, but it's not me. They will go. If you take a deep breath, your anger will go. If you don't take a deep breath and you become angry, then that will lead to anger and rage and thoughts and sayings and all sorts of things. So that slight difference, that gap between something happening and you either reacting or not reacting, is one of the few things that you have in your control. If you do not react, you let it go, that karma will disappear. If you react, that karma will bind back. And in that process is where your life is. So you see, some people will always be calm regardless of what is happening around them. No matter what somebody says, they will always have something good to say. No matter how bad the situation, they will always be positive, that it'll pass, something better will happen, and so on. Whereas some people will always get angry at the smallest things. Some people will, you will find, have this anxiety about, things that could go wrong, or, if I say something, what will people think of me? Or they have this, life where what they're doing is living in this pain of things that they have, situations that they've faced in the past. And those circumstances have basically, they believe, given them the wrong path or the wrong scenarios. And because they acted in a particular way. If I had done this instead of this, things would have been better. If I hadn't said that, things would have been better. Now, in that scenario is where we live most of the time, which means that in reality, we're not actually living in the present. We're living in the mind that we have created. In that mind, there is one other reality that we all need to think about. And that is the reality of how real that mind is. So at the end of this talk, there may be 50 people on this Zoom call today. At the end of it, if you ask each of them what it is that they heard, they're all hearing the same things, but all their recollections will be different. And what they will do is take the recollection that they have, and to that recollection, they will add things to fill in the gaps, and that becomes their reality. And therefore, if you think about life in that way, every situation that you have in your mind is yours. It's not reality, because every other person who was there will have a different recollection of it. And so most of these things that we think about, whether it's the experiences we've had in the past, whether it's anxieties about the future, whether it's things that have caused us pain before, are largely in our minds. They do not exist in reality. And although the situation may have existed in some way, what's in your mind is your imagination of it. It's part of the reality with your experience and your feelings and passions and so on added to it. And that forms the frame, the lens through which you then see everything else. So you get this feeling of anger, you have these thoughts about what has happened in the past when, people might have said or done things to you. And then you take that feeling and those thoughts and you start exhibiting anger, whether it's, you have those thoughts or whether you shout or so on. And so this mind, in many ways, becomes the source of how you lead your life. Now, thinking about that in another way, think about this idea of memories and the memories that we have. When you ask people about their childhood, what happens in their childhood is essentially things that they have good memories or bad memories of. But when you look at all of those memories and you look at the length of their childhood, we are very good at forgetting things we don't want to remember, and we're very good at remembering the few things we want to remember. So the whole childhood is probably a dozen memories. And when you think about that idea, again, think about this from another perspective, that why do we keep certain memories and why do we forget others? And the reason for that is that when those memories, etch a mark on our psyche, it's because they either have something that gave us a lot of pleasure at the time, and we think of those as the good moments in our life, or a lot of pain. And they become, again, part of the cornerstone of what we think makes us us, and therefore it becomes the way we see the world. Now, think about that again in the sense that when you're in any situation and it's an unknown situation to you, what do you tend to do? You tend to rely on the memories that you have and the ones you've stored to think about what is likely to happen in that situation. And then your reaction starts to form from that mindset, which means that, our ability to become not just fearless, but bold and go and do things is largely restrained by the fact that we believe, and those memories could be ours or what we hear happen to other people, but we believe that certain things will happen if we do certain actions. And that causes us to limit the way we behave. So let me give you an example. If you're starting a new job next week, the first thing you'll think about is that, if I don't dress in a certain way, people may, think good of me or bad of me or whatever it is. If I, don't do this, and this, because I've seen in the past that doing those things is good or bad. And so we are now molded in this path that we have now imagined to be the way to act, to behave, to dress, and so on. And in that, we have now already put a boundary around our minds. So you can see that in all the things I'm telling you, this mind is full of all sorts of complex scenarios and structures that you've built. And if you then, through that, put any kind of feeling, any kind of emotion, it has so many things to hang on to that emotion. With some people, you see that every time they get the feeling of anger, there are so many things they can think about that have made them angry or will make them angry. And that in itself is usually enough for you to then exhibit that. And that exhibiting that is where the karma comes in. Okay? So I'm just going to change the screens. So the thing I want to talk about is, what is it that changes this in a person? And what is it that changes that mindset? And if you think about this idea of people who have overcome this, in the sense that they've overcome their feelings, their emotions, their ability to exhibit anger and pride and greed and so on, and those who have essentially got over their attachments, what is it that those people typically do? Those people we refer to as monks and nuns, because they don't exhibit those things. And when you think about that, just think about what it is that they do as soon as they decide to go on that path. The first thing they do is that they cut ties with everything that is material. Okay? So in many cases, they change their names, they leave their families, they give up all their possessions, they give up all their attachments, whether they're people or things or so on, and they lead a life of humility. So you beg, you walk barefoot, and you have no idea of where your next meal, your next lodging, your next person is coming from. And just think about how different that is to this whole idea of the materialistic life that we lead. And in that life, what do? We actually enforce all of those things, don't we? We look at this idea of attachment, and my work colleagues, a lot of people, for example, put their their title or their qualification on their name. They have my family, my kids, my house, my car, and so on. So there's a huge amount of attachment. There's a huge amount of materialistic pleasure. So things that you get through your senses. If you go to see a film, if you go to a concert, if you go to a restaurant, all of these are materialistic pleasures. And in all of those, what we are doing is essentially being further and further away from those who have renounced all of that. And so what, you might say? And the so what is that essentially by doing more and more and more of those, what are we actually doing? We're putting down more memories, we're putting more experiences, we're setting our mind in certain directions, that this is good, this is bad, I like him, I don't like him, I want to do this, I don't want to do this. And that attaches more hooks, more ways for karma that is rising to attach itself. And once it attaches itself, it gives you more and more of a way of exhibiting it. If you got anger karma, but you had nothing to be angry about, you're such a joyful person, you have no memories of anybody ever being bad to you, you have nothing that has ever caused you anger in the past, that anger is just going to leave. It's got nothing to hold on to. By giving it things to hold on to, what we're doing is creating a scenario where it becomes evident to us that we are angry, and these are the thoughts we've had about that anger, and then we engage in the thoughts and we basically exhibit them. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is, if you think about this idea of awareness, and what I mean by awareness is when these things are happening, how many of us are actually aware that that is what is happening, as opposed to believing that all we're experiencing is us? And the reason I say that is this, that when you think of this idea of awareness, if, for example, you're walking down a street with headphones on, you're standing in the, in the train and you've got your earpods, you're engrossed in your phone and social media, all of these things basically mean that your awareness is in what is around you, what is happening to you, your body, your experiences, and so on, is no longer there because it is somewhere else. You focused on something other than this. In that awareness or lack of awareness, you're more likely to react rather than act. So something happens and there'll be a reaction from you because you haven't felt it coming, you haven't, analyzed it, you've lost that gap between it happening and you reacting, you react. Reaction, again, is the easiest way to keep binding karma. So that lack of awareness is something that becomes a huge factor. And again, think about what those who are beyond this do. They spend a lot of their time building awareness. If you're sitting in meditation, essentially, what is meditation? Meditation is this idea of focusing your mind on one thing and one thing only, and being able to concentrate on it without any other distractions, right? So if you're in that state of mind, you're consciously and constantly aware of everything that happens around you, within you, in your mind, and so on. And that means that you're able to act in a way that you want to, rather than react because you weren't aware that that was the case. And so I'll give you a simple example that I see quite often, that you travel in the train and you see everybody has earpods and is on their mobile phone. And so often a stop will come and people aren't aware that that's their stop. And then they look at it at the last minute, get up and try and run because they've suddenly, seen that. Whereas if you're aware of that train journey and where it is and, who's around you and so on, it becomes easier to see that, okay, mine's the next stop, go to the door and come out. Simple example, but it shows you how one, happens because you're in a panic and the other happens because you're aware. In that situation, what happens is that your ability to become positive in everything that happens, and the reason for the positivity is because if we bind only positive karma, that becomes our destiny, that we lead a positive life. But if we're reacting to everything that happens, that's very unlikely. So that's the consequence of that. The third and last thing I'm going to say, and then we'll stop for questions, is that what happens with most of what we do is not that we spend our time looking for good things in what happens around us and praising people and being happy to see others succeed. We spend a lot of our time finding fault, criticizing, comparing, they did that, but I could have done that so much better, and complaining. They could have, they did that so badly, if they're going to do it, why didn't they put some effort and do it properly, etc., etc., etc. So those things, again, are things that are not only negative, but things that happen to you and then you express. If you want to become a positive person, if you want to have a positive life, the first rule of that is you must accept. Accept that what is happening to you is because of you, your karma. Accept that if something bad has happened, it's only because you must have done the same thing to somebody else at some other time. And so you take out the other person or the other people out of this formula. There is no somebody else did this to me. There is no because of this situation, this happened. Everything happens for a reason, and that reason is karma. You are experiencing the karma you have bound in your last life and other previous lives. And therefore, if it's all to do with you, it means there's nobody else involved. The way to think about this is a simple rule that if you have two kids and you give both kids the same education, the same love, the same upbringing, it is never the case that both kids grow up to be the same. Their personalities will be different, the way they behave is different, their education is different. All these things will always be there because they have come with their own karma. All you're doing is providing an environment. You cannot, by putting them in the best schools, guarantee that they will get the results to go to the best universities. It doesn't happen. But what we do is give them the chance. We give them the opportunity, which is right. But then it depends upon them and their abilities and their focus and their efforts. Similarly, everything that happens to us is not because of somebody else, it's because of us. And the sooner we accept that, it means that we don't spend our time pointing at other people and talking about them and criticizing them and comparing with them. What we do is try to be positive people because that positivity is essentially our destiny. So I'm going to stop there. Happy to take questions, comments, thoughts. if you could either put your hand up or put something in the chat, then we'll know who you are. Or have I confused you so much that there isn't any?
Mehul bhai, I have received a question from Kiran's iPad. Kiran, do you want to put your video on and ask the question? Okay. Basically, she's saying, is it correct that there is good karma and bad karma, but to be liberated, you need to remove both?
That's an excellent question. So that's a very good question. The short answer is yes, but there is a long answer. And the long answer is this, that at this stage of where we are in the Earth's time frame, we're in a era that doesn't allow liberation, number one. So it's not possible to get liberated. And I see people saying, well, what's the point of doing good if I have to remove that karma as well? There is an answer to that. You know, what is the reason, for example, there's a derasad behind me. What is the reason we go to the derasad? What is the reason we do religious activities? The reason is very simple. And that is that by doing these activities, we will build good karma. Now, we already have in our bodies a lot of bad karma. All of us, I would say, less than normal, because we are leading lives that are, frankly, very good compared to the rest of the human race. You know, we're in a safe country, leading lives where, you know, we have jobs, we have security, we have food, we have houses, whatever. So there are actually lives that are, you know, enlightened in many ways, and entitled in many ways, because they're way above and beyond the average. But the reason we want to do even more good karma, and we keep doing it, is because at some point in time, that good karma will become enough. And we don't know when that is, because we don't know the bad karma that we've started with. It'll become enough to suppress the bad karma to a point where you become aware of the soul that is within you. So think of analogies, right? So if you're thinking about a clouded sky and all you see is gray and rain, and then there's a little hole in the clouds and a ray of sunshine comes through, that is the effect of the good karma. Now the sun, even though we couldn't see it, hasn't gone anywhere. It's always there. The soul is always here, even though we don't see it. But if we can suppress the karma enough for even a moment, we will experience that soul. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important for one big reason, that however much you read a book about something that you haven't done, like going snorkeling, for example, or skiing, or to some country, the minute you go there, it becomes an experience rather than a story that you have heard or read. And that experience, in terms of understanding your soul, is so profound, that it changes your life, because you now associate who you are with that soul rather than with this physical body. So it's life-changing. But to get to it, we have to reach that point where we can experience that soul. And this is why we should keep doing as many good deeds as possible, because we really don't know how many bad deeds we've done in the past and how much karma we have got inside of us. I hope that makes some sense.
I think it does to me. Hopefully, Kiran's, it makes sense to you as well. I have another question if nobody else has another question. Meera, Darshna?
I have not received any other questions.
Okay. I think this goes to social rather than religion, but Sushila Shah has asked, if everything is about karma, then do we need a court of law for all kinds of criminals and civil cases where humans have committed crimes and civil actions for justice?
So you could, at one level, answer that too is karma. that going to prison is the karma that they face. But the reality is, and this is the reality, that we haven't always had these things. You know, in the past, even if you go back 200 years, these things weren't, you know, everywhere. And what there was a lot of a chaos and disorder. And what these things have done is actually brought a sense of order. Now, does that mean that they're right? Not always, because the people who make those decisions are human and make, you know, as we keep seeing, there's always errors, miscarriages of justice, etc., etc. The other thing that you always see is that, you know, laws keep getting changed. So who decides whether this is worse than this, whether this deserves 5 years in prison and this deserves 10? So these things are flawed completely. But their purpose is actually that the vast majority of us live in what we consider to be a safe environment and live in a society where, you know, we're not constantly worried about, you know, being raided or getting mugged or having, you know, people attack us, which used to be what life was like at one point. And that's its, you know, its purpose, to bring order to chaos. But as I said, I mean, the big question in all of that is two things. I mean, is that karma in itself? It probably is. And secondly, is it absolutely right? No, because it's decided by humans.
Thank you, Mehool bhai. That was actually very insightful. Please, if anybody else has a question, do raise your hand or unmute yourself and ask. Mehool bhai is here. He's a treasure of knowledge. We do want to rate that treasure. So please do ask your questions.
Whilst people are thinking, let me put another thought out there. And that is, you know, this question of why do the same things happen to the same people again and again and again? And the answer to that is nothing more complex than it is because they're living in the same thought process, the same thought cycle, and leading lives based on the same fear factors, the same anxieties, the same worries. And so they keep repeating what they see and hear. So if you've seen this in so many people, that something will happen to them, they will then tell 5 other people. But in that, you know, the story will get progressively bigger and more dramatic and so on. What are they doing? You know, they're taking one incidence, just one incidence, and multiplying it 5 times. So now the consequence of that one incidence is 5-fold. And in that 5-fold, what will happen? The same thing will happen again and again and again and again. So in reality, you know, to change situations is really easy. Change your mindset, change your thought process. You know, and this idea of faith sometimes is incredibly important because, you know, when we walk into this derasa and we have faith that, you know, I'm a good person, nothing bad will ever happen to me, you know, that faith is actually very true, but you must live it, must believe in it. You know, it's not enough just to say it and then go back into fear and anxiety and everything else. I think you've got another question from Ketan.
Ketan, please unmute yourself and ask the question.
Thank you. You know, give us to send it in one message for the admin, but
I can't hear that.
I'm just going to read it out. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. It's just going back to something you mentioned and talk about when one talks to other people about their own experiences. So my question was, is talking to others, which in one sense could be seen as therapy, as a means to try and reduce the personal effects of negative thoughts and feelings, also not a way to help break the bad karmic cycles through that feeling of relief of expressing whatever experience, whether it's good or bad?
You see, normally when people tell other people, they narrate stories about what has happened to them. Typically, it's not about them believing that they need to change anything. It's more about them either wanting sympathy or praise. And typically what happens is that these things are fashioned in such a way, they're told in such a way that, you know, they tend to be, in my experience, sort of more dramatic to try and get a reaction from the other person. You know, this happened to me and I had to go into hospital and I had to sit in A&E for 8 hours, and then, you know, and in this, you're not expecting the other person to say, well, if you hadn't done that, it wouldn't have happened to you. So, you know, next time don't do it. You're expecting some level of, you know, comfort and sympathy and so on. And people do that for the simple reason that most people need somebody else's, you know, acknowledgement or validation to what they have done or what they are doing. So in this validation, you know, you say to somebody that I've decided to do this, this, and this, and they say, that's a great move, well done, you know, that's excellent. That validation actually gives us the confidence to do it again. If they criticize it, then we will always doubt ourselves in that scenario. And so my answer to you, I guess, is this, that when you are doing that, if you're doing that on the basis that you want some help or support, I think that is perfectly okay. And that will make you more aware of what is going on. If you're doing it because you believe by sharing it, you will get some sympathy, comfort, validation, or whatever, that's the same thing. That's basically the same thing as phoning 5 other people and saying, you'll never guess what happened to me today. And that is 5 times, you know, the response. So this is, you know, this is the thing that in the Jain religion, there is a word called bhav, intention. Bhav actually is everything. So I'll give you a silly example, but it's an example. If you do during Paryushan, if you come and sit and do Pratikaman, if you're listening to that Pratikaman and saying Tas Michhami Dukram, but you haven't understood a word of what has been said, with what bhav and for what are you asking forgiveness? If you've understood it and you relate it to something that has happened to you or you've done and you know is wrong, then you will be full of remorse and you're saying, I'm really sorry. And, you know, and there is a weakening of that karma. That is the effect of it. But if you say it and you're looking at your watch and thinking it's half an hour, I wonder how long I've got to go. And you keep saying, you know, going through this motion, all that happens is you're doing a ritual. You're going through a motion. There's no intention behind it. So it's the same thing with this, that the bhav with which you do things actually makes a very, very big difference. And it's possible to do the same action with different bhavs and get different results.
I have another question from Sheila Ashwin Shah. How do we know we are doing the right thing when we are trying to do religious things to shed our karmas? I think this sort of attaches to your example of, you know, doing Pratikaman without understanding what the Pratikaman is.
So when you're doing anything religious, and think about this in 2 or 3 ways. So if you're meditating, if you're, you know, at a derasar saying some prayers, if you're doing Pratikaman, if you're, you know, going on a pilgrimage, whatever you're doing, if you do it with focus and concentration and with knowledge of what you're doing, you will then have the right attitude, the bhav, to be able to do it. If you're meditating in the morning and you know you woke up 5 minutes late and you're sitting there thinking, I wonder if the time's up because I need to catch my bus and I'm going to be late. Where is that meditation? It's in your anxiety about missing the bus. And that's what you're meditating on. If you're doing your prayers and you do them every day, and so you go recite through them at full speed, where is your understanding of the words that you are saying? the way to do religious things is to do them with knowledge and with focus and with full intention. And it makes a big difference when you do that to not only what you're doing, but the transformation it brings within you. Because the purpose of this is not to pray to Mahavir Bhagwan. He's in, he's in moksha, he's in Shitsila, he's out of this universe, he can't help you. But by praying to him as somebody you want to become, it will bring a transformation within you. So if you want to transform who you are, then do it, invest in yourself completely with full attention and focus and intention. If you think by saying it loudly to a murti, you've made that murti happy and you can now go, that's not how it works. It doesn't do anything. So those three things are crucial. That you have the intention, you have the focus, and you're doing it with knowledge. And that will mean that you fully understand what you're doing, and it'll give you, the benefits, the full benefits of that.
I've received a question from Sandeep Shah. He's asking if attachment to other people is involved, but if good intentions for them are thought of, does this need to be changed because of attachment, or would this lead to good karma in the future? Excellent
question. So when you think, so one thing about Jainism is we're very good at, this idea of anekant, or many sided point of view to life. So let me give you an example of anekant. If there are two people and you look at them from the perspective of their energy, they're both souls, they're both atmas. There's no difference between them. In fact, if you look at two people and a tree, in reality, they're all the same because they're all atmas, but exhibiting different bodily states, okay? The problem with attachment is not the attachment itself, but the consequences of it. Because when something happens to something we're attached to, it triggers emotions within us. Okay, so if you have kids and they're sitting there A-levels and they don't get the grades to go to university, suddenly you become sad because they didn't get the grades, which means your happiness and sadness now depends on them. It's not within you. You've given up that control. Okay. Similarly, you have a brand new car and you're going along and somebody touches it. You're going to get annoyed or angry or so on because it's your car and it is something that's your pride and joy. So this is the issue with attachment. That attachment means that you're basically, it becomes a proxy, it becomes a means to control your emotions, whether they're good or bad. If you're able to reduce that attachment so that you're not less attached to those people, but you're equally attached in some way. So if a child falls down, you'll act, in a similar way. You'll make sure it's okay, and make sure that it's not hurt. That sort of thing becomes compassion. It becomes kindness. And that's a very positive feeling. And you can do that for everything. So it's not about reducing the positivity you have for something. It's making sure that positivity is for everything. And then you become a positive person. This idea that we keep saying, be kind. What does be kind mean? That in any situation, become compassionate. Don't judge it to say, well, it doesn't affect me. It's nothing to do with me. Even if you can't physically do it, have a good thought. Say a prayer, wish them well, bless them. These are all acts of kindness. And what you're doing is sending positive energy. If you don't do that, and you kind of say nothing to do with me, whoever's child that is will sort that child out. What are you doing? You're displaying negativity on the basis that you don't have attachment to this child.
Thanks, Mehool Bhai. I've not received any other questions. Kavit, have you?
I have one more, and maybe we can take this as the last question. What are Mehool Bhai's thoughts on a person carrying in this life the karmas of our forefathers?
So the one thing that is interesting is about this is that it's very important to understand what your karma does. So if you're born in a family where, religion is the norm, or you're born in a family where nobody's ever practiced religion, that is going to affect your ability of being exposed to it, of learning it, of kind of, understanding what it is, right? So the idea of birth, the idea of having a body that is able to practice religion, the idea of having a good set of friends, a good family, are all due to your karma. So your forefathers, in many ways, because they're your forefathers, have already given you the benefits of that karma because you were born to them or to that line. In terms of karma, your karma is your own. Now, many people will find this incredibly hard to believe because the Hindu way of explaining this is very different. And sometimes there is a mix-up, right? So if there are two people, and these two people live here on earth, and one person is really good, and one person is really bad, at the end of this life, one will go up to heaven and the other one will go to hell. And after that, they will go to all these various places, and it is unlikely, very unlikely, that they will ever meet. Now, that's not the Hindu way of explaining this. So that's why most people assume that, that life after life, you're in the same place with the same people. It can't be logically possible because your karma dictates your next birth. And if you had to wait for somebody else before you could achieve something, that means that you're stalled here, you're waiting here, for a long time before anybody else, for somebody else to come. So in that scenario, what happens is this, and it's a very, very practical way of looking at it, which is that, everything that has happened before you is the reason you have this life. You're born in this family, you've got this environment, you've got the learning you have, and so on. But at that point, everything that happens thereafter is yours. So whether it's good, it's bad, in this life and the next. So some of the things that you experience have already been fixed from before, because karma can go through multiple lives. So that is sometimes called fate. It's there and it will happen. Everything else is your destiny, and that's due to your karma. Now, in that, there is also a small get out, which is that if you do good things, it will, by definition, remove the bad fate that you might have. So if you have crashed into somebody's car on purpose, and therefore you're going to have a car crash, because that's your fate, your good deeds can make that a scrape rather than a write-off. So the idea of good deeds is going to help you through all things. But it's not that you're carrying anybody else's. What you're carrying is your own. The only link you have to your forefathers is the environment and the birth location and all of that they've given you.
I don't have any further questions, so Mira.
Sorry. May I say something, please? You
Please
got
do.
time?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mehool Bhai, for a very insightful and a very thought-provoking talk. It's a very, very tall order. I just wonder, would you be able to share how do you live your life practicing everything you've just told us?
So that's again a very interesting question. So yes, it is a very tall order. And yes, it is not easy at all. And you can see that, in a simple statistic, that in a worldwide Jain community of 7 or 8 million, we have probably 10,000 people who've given up this materialistic life and become sadhus, right? Mine, a very small proportion. The reality of all of this is this, that none of us actually is able to practice all of this all of the time. It's just not possible, because of all the things that happen. The two big things that I try and live my life by is, number one, this idea of trying to be kind, being positive, doing what I can to help anybody, because that is something that I truly believe is the right way forward. And the second thing that I try and do is, this idea of making sure that whatever I do is with the right intention. That there isn't basically an ulterior motive. There isn't a way to do things that are, that might be falsehood, might be, harmful to others, and so on. And if I do those two things to the best of my ability, I believe I'll move forward. Everything else, it'll take another life, I'm sure. And, the problem with living in, a society like this, which is by definition materialistic, is that you're always going against the grain when you become spiritual. And it always is, a very difficult and tall order. But one thing I will tell you, which, we should never forget, is that even though we live this life as if it is endless, it will end. Whether we like it or not, this body will give up on us. It will suffer. It will go through pain. It will go through disease. These things are natural, and we see it all around us, okay? So when those things start to happen, at some point in time, you will start to wonder, how do I get out of this? Because I don't want to lead a life where, I'm going to suffer this life and the next life and the next life. And that's when this sort of spirituality dawns on you, that you start to believe that if you start to change, your thoughts, your actions, become positive, have the right power, the right intentions, you will slowly change the destiny and the path that this life has. And I've seen that in my life. I've seen that a lot in my life, that what I've been able to do is not just due to what you might think of as education or career or whatever. It's gone beyond that. And I have to believe, and I do believe, that is because I have changed the way that I think about life and how I practice it. And that's what I encourage all of you to do. Start with one simple thing. Just become positive. Every situation is positive. Everything is positive. Become kind, become considerate. Those sorts of things will actually change your relationships, the way that other people see you, and the way that things happen to you, because the things that you perceive as bad will start to disappear. And that is just, a fact of life that I've seen. So that's what I would advise.
That's great. Thank you so much, Mehool Bhai. I think the main takeaway is this is, be kind. And it's all about law of attraction as well, isn't it? So I'd like to thank everyone for attending tonight's session. Mehool Bhai will be back next week. So please do join us and spread the word as well. And we'll end the session now. So we will see you next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you.